Do you know what, Brian? I think this is the first time I've been a bit scared and nervous about a topic of a little bit about addiction, because I told you that we have addiction in our family.
Yeah.
And coming from someone like me who's never had any addiction, although I could be addicted to work, but like, let's say no hard substances, no alcohol addiction. I feel like I could say something that's might piss people off. Because what I'm feeling as someone who lives with or has a family member that has addiction is like, I'm starting to lose my compassion, and I'm starting to feel like people can use addiction as their get out of jail free card. Oh, but I'm an addict. You don't understand because I'm an addict, but you don't understand. Do other people feel like that?
100%. The one thing I'd like to say there is, Yvonne, is that compassion is interesting. Sometimes people get compassion mixed up with being sensitive and being nice and stuff like that. Compassion is hard. Compassion is not enabling, letting somebody in addiction know that they're in the depths of it as well. So I think that's really important. But I think what can happen with loved ones as well, that when they're struggling with addiction, it's not that the compassion isn't there anymore. It's nearly overtaken by anger and fear. You're afraid for what might happen, so you get angry, and that cloaks the compassion. And if somebody, addiction is just so hard to understand. I think that's what makes it really, really scary. Like, because people think the addiction is the substance or the behavior, but it's usually something that is under the bonnet driving that behavior, driving that substance use. So it's very hard to understand and disentangle, and very difficult for people to beat it. And I think that just speaks to so much of what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I actually do struggle with it because I have this motto in my life. Like, I talk a lot about manifestation, and I'm like, manifestation starts with you. You got to take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to say, this shit is over. I don't want to live my life anymore like this. So why don't they do it?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been doing a lot of work in the addiction space, particularly of late. And for somebody that's spent a long time in addiction and done a PhD based on addiction, I can't believe how much I've learned in recent times. And I've nearly been putting blocks on top of my lived experience with it as well. And one thing that's very hard for somebody to understand that wasn't in addiction is how different a realm you're in. Gabor Mate has a beautiful book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and it's about the hungry ghost. You're chasing something. You're like a ghost chasing something. You're hungry for something, but it doesn't fill you up no matter what that is. So you're a hungry ghost. But in the realm, it's like you're living in a different realm. You don't see the world like a normal person, whatever that is, but you just see the world differently. And you have to create a web of lies to protect your addiction. And the web of lies becomes so complex that you're not really in reality anymore. Now, there's different variations of it. Some people are deeper in addiction. Some people have addictions classified, defined as addiction, but they're probably not as entangled in a web of lies in a different world. But for some people, they're just in a different realm of reality, and I couldn't even see that the normal world existed, the world I live in now. It was so far out of reach. So it's just really difficult for someone to understand from the outside, and it's really difficult on the inside of addiction to see what it potentially is out there.
When did your addiction start?
God, my addiction started from the minute I was born, which is interesting. So obviously not this substance, but I came into the world with a condition known as intestinal malrotation. My intestines were twisted, and I ended up having an operation without a general anaesthetic as an infant. That was the practice pre-1985. They didn't believe that infants experience pain like normal adults. So for any infant pre-1985, they would have given you a local anaesthetic, but the baby would have been awake while undergoing the surgery.
Oh my God.
So I'm 46 now, and I still want to rub the scar on my belly. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk says. Now, I've done a lot of work around that, but that set the tone for me. I became a finely tuned anxiety machine. Trauma changes your biology, and I grew up full of anxiety, agitation, just afraid of my own inner body. Like, I grew up with a phobic fear of my heartbeat, my breath, and my pulse, terrified of my own heartbeat. And I was always just agitated and worried as a kid. So my addiction started from the trauma. The anxiety and the panic attacks exasperated that challenge. So that's what was underpinning my addiction. But the addiction didn't start until 13, 14 when I started dabbling in drugs. But I done heroin for the first time at 16. And it made me feel safe, secure. It brought a softness to my body that I'd never experienced, and I was addicted from that moment. Not daily use. I was 20 before I was a daily heroin addict, but it was the trauma underpinning that drove the addiction. So it started very early.
Oh my God. Yeah. And there's a really, really interesting, not even from babies, but even from pregnancy, there's a really interesting scientific study of rats or mice. And they give the mom who's pregnant a peppermint smell and they shock her. So the smell to the mom is, and then when the baby mice are born, that smell of peppermint gives them a stress response.
Fear conditioning. So that I've never heard of that particular study, but that makes so much sense. So you're basically pairing an unconditioned stimulus, which would be the peppermint, and that carries through to the baby. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and when I had I had a baby that passed away during pregnancy. It was 5.5 months, and then I subsequently got pregnant, and I've never had anxiety before in my life. Like I'm not an anxious person, but during that pregnancy, I was really, really anxious, and just fear of another loss of a child. And it's just something that's like, I'm almost with my little girl now, all of the kids, we practice gratitude. I was telling you about that, but I'm like, I probably passed on, we have to be conscious that some addictions, they stem from childhood, but could they stem from before that?
Yeah, well, the research shows that like intergenerational trauma, like it's not like people often think that like the grandfather was an alcoholic, the son was an alcoholic, his daughter were alcoholics as well. That it's genetic, it's a biological thing, it's within the family. But what the research shows is that biological susceptibilities are what travel through genetics, like a sensitivity and stuff like that. But the research also shows with epigenetics, like certain conditions can express genes to come alive under certain conditions. So intergenerational trauma is very real. So for someone that underwent challenges within the famine or something like that, it could be 2 generations down the line and those genes could be expressed. And again, like, what is addiction? This is the key point here. Addiction is a drive to escape emotional and psychological pain. That's the essence of addiction. The definition of addiction is continued use or of a behaviour despite adverse consequences, but it's usually to avoid and escape something. So if that pain in your life manifests itself, well, you will seek to avoid and escape. Like, I don't have any want for any drug or drink anymore. Like, I feel immune or bulletproof towards addiction, but because I've gotten to the bottom of anxiety. I have a beautiful relationship with anxiety today. I have a toolbox to manage anxiety. I actually enjoy anxiety, which was a miracle for me. But if World War III happened and something happened and I lost a leg or God knows what horrific things could come into my life potentially, and all of a sudden I'm really anxious and I can't cope with my reality, well, maybe a drug-fueled reality would be a better alternative. So you're never completely bulletproof. And I think what's really important is nobody is bulletproof to addiction, no matter where you come from. If the conditions and your environment are a certain set the tone for something, anyone can become someone who wants to avoid and escape that reality. So we're all susceptible to some point, depending on our place in life.